The kitchen clock reads 2:47 a.m. You're standing there exhausted while accusations circle like vultures. Your abuser's voice cuts through the night. Just admit it. You know what you did. You try explaining, you try clarifying, you lay out what actually happened, what you meant, how you felt in that moment, but none of it matters. The night won't end until you say the words that your abuser demands. Eventually, you break. Fine, yes, whatever. I was trying to hurt you. But you weren't. That's a lie. You know it's a lie, even as the words leave your mouth. The words taste like poison, but the room falls quiet. The torture stops. Your partner nods, satisfied. Thank you for finally being honest, she says. But that wasn't honesty. That was a forced confession, an admission of guilt for something you never did. Words spoken just to make the torture stop. Sometimes you say things that are complete fabrications. Sometimes exhaustion makes you agree to wildly distorted versions of what happened. Interpretations so far from your actual intent that you can't even follow how they got there. Once those false words leave your mouth, they harden. They become evidence. Evidence that gets quoted by your abuser in every future argument, every attempt to defend yourself, every effort to tell your side of the story. You said it yourself. You admitted it, she says. Forced confessions turn your voice into the weapon that imprisons you. This is entrapment, one of the most devastating psychological tactics in an abusive relationship. That's the topic of today's episode. We're going to explore what forced confessions really are, how they trap you in false narratives about who you are and what you have done. We'll examine the two main ways that an abuser will do this to you: when you're pressured into saying specific words, when emotional chaos is used to extract admissions of false guilt. We'll look at why this hits men particularly hard, given how we're taught to handle conflict and emotional situations. And finally, we'll discuss practical ways to recognize these traps and protect yourself from them. For those of you who are new here, this is Stand Again, a lived experience platform for male victims of family violence. Abuse is not limited to one gender, but this channel focuses on the male perspective because it is so often dismissed or misunderstood. If this content helps you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your words might just help another man find his. Let's get into this topic. Forced confessions are a manipulation tactic where someone pressures you into admitting guilt for things you did not do, or intentions behind your actions that you never had. The admission can be completely false, or it can be a severely distorted version of what actually happened. Either way, once you say those words, they become permanent evidence that gets used against you from that point forward. Your partner will start with an accusation about something you did or something they claim you intended. You try to explain what actually happened, you try to clarify what you actually meant, you try to provide context. Every attempt you make gets shut down. They tell you you are making excuses or that you're lying, or they even tell you you are being manipulative. The accusation gets repeated, you answer it again, they repeat it again, and this cycle continues. The conversation will stretch on for hours. It can happen late at night when you're already exhausted from work or parenting, or even early hours in the morning before you're fully awake. It can follow you from room to room if you try to create space. And it can continue past midnight, past 1 a.m., or even past 2 a.m. Your ability to think clearly will deteriorate as exhaustion sets in, and your defenses will break down. Eventually, you reach a point where you'll say anything to make it stop. So you give them the exact words they've been demanding, and the fight ends, and the room goes quiet. But those words you just spoke become cemented as truth. The context behind them disappears completely. Your partner treats your statement as a genuine admission of guilt. The fact that you were exhausted does not matter. The fact that you'd been arguing for 3 hours doesn't matter either. The fact that you said those words just to end the harassment also doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that the words came out of your mouth. From that moment, those words are treated as your honest confession about who you are and what you did. The confession doesn't stay contained to that one conversation. It becomes the foundation for every future argument. Your partner refers back to it constantly. You remember you already admitted you were trying to hurt me. You said it yourself. Remember, you finally told the truth about what you were doing. Every new conflict gets fought on grounds where you've already been convicted by your own voice. You can't defend yourself because your own words have been turned into the prosecution's star witness. The damage spreads beyond your relationship. Your partner quotes these forced confessions to their friends. They spread them with family members. They bring them up in couples therapy. They reference them in legal proceedings. People hear your words taken completely out of context. Nobody asks how those words were obtained. Nobody questions what state you were in when you said them. Nobody considers the hours of pressure that preceded them. They simply hear your confession and accept it as truth. The manipulation that happened inside your home gets carried into the outside world and presented as your authentic admission of guilt. Living with forced confessions means you carry a growing collection of false statements about yourself. Things you said to try to make peace get reframed as admissions of cruelty. Things you said to de escalate get rewritten as confessions of intentional harm. In time, these accumulate into a weight that's always present. You're fighting against two things simultaneously: your partner's false narrative about who you are, and your own doubt about whether anyone will believe your actual truth when your own voice has been used to contradict it. Let's now take a look at two ways an abuser will force you to confess to a lie. The first is a coerced agreement, or the just say it trap. Coerced agreement uses aggressive pressure to force you into verbally confirming a narrative about what you did and why you did it. The psychological mechanism is fear based. You confess to escape punishment, to end aggressive, relentless pursuit, or to avoid threatened consequences. Your partner constructs a story about an event. They decide what happened, what you intended, and what it means about your character. They then demand that you confirm this story. The demand is direct and hostile. Just say it. Admit what you did. Tell me you were trying to hurt me. The pressure is sustained and aggressive. They follow you from room to room. They reopen the conversation immediately after you've answered. They interrupt your sleep or your work. The demand continues until you break. The key behaviors are pursuit and repetition. If you try to leave the room, they follow. If you try to end the conversation, they restart it. If you offer your own explanation of what happened, they reject it and repeat their demand. That's not what I asked you to say. Stop making excuses, just admit it. The interaction becomes inescapable. Your attempts to explain your actual perspectives are labeled as defensive or even as manipulation. Your attempts to add context are dismissed as excuses. The only thing that will end the interaction is you speaking words that confirm their version of events. Threats can often also accompany the demand. If you don't admit this, I'm leaving. Say it, or I'm telling everyone what you did. Admit it, or you're not seeing the kids this weekend. These threats create urgency and fear. The threat of social, relational, or legal consequences push you towards compliance. You start to calculate what's worse: saying words I don't believe, or facing the threatened outcome. Exhaustion plays a major role here. The demand continues for hours, often late into the night, when your cognitive defenses are at their lowest. Your ability to hold your position deteriorates. Your capacity to articulate your actual perspective weakens. Eventually, you reach a breaking point where you'll say whatever is required to make the demands stop. You might say it reluctantly, You might say it with obvious sarcasm or even anger. The tone doesn't matter to your partner. Once the words leave your mouth, they have what they need. The confession is immediately preserved. Your partner quotes it back to you in later arguments. They share it with friends and family. They reference it in therapy or legal settings. The context of extraction disappears. Nobody hears about the 3 hour pursuit or the interrupted sleep or the threats that preceded your statement. They only hear your words, presented as your honest admission of guilt. Now let's look at the other way. An abuser will make you confess to a lie, which is emotional extortion. Emotional extortion uses displays of distress to manipulate you into confessing. The psychological mechanism is different from coerced agreement. Here, your protective instinct and desire to help are weaponized against you. You don't confess out of fear, you confess because you're trying to stabilize an unstable person or stop someone's visible suffering. Your partner produces or intensifies an emotional display. They cry intensely, they become hysterical, they appear to be in acute psychological pain. This display is presented as a direct result of something you did or did not do. The message is clear. You caused this suffering, and you have the power to end it by admitting to the false allegation. The key difference from coerced agreement is a psychological hook. You're not being chased or threatened, you're watching someone you care about appear to suffer, and you're being told that your admission is a solution to their pain. Your natural instinct to help, to comfort, to fix problems gets activated. Men can be particularly vulnerable to this because how we are socialized to protect and to solve. When someone we care about is in distress, we want to fix it. The fastest way to fix it is to give them what they're asking for. The displays typically look like uncontrollable crying that continues until you admit your fault. Statements like, I can't stop feeling this way until you're honest with me, or dramatic emotional escalation when you try to explain your perspective. Your attempts to calm them down or talk them through what happened are rejected unless they include the admission that they are looking for. Threats often accompany emotional extortion, but they're framed differently than in coerced agreement. If you don't admit this, I don't know if I can stay in this relationship. I can't stop crying until you tell me you hurt me. These statements frame the threat as a consequence of their emotional state rather than as a direct punishment. The implication is that you have the power to prevent these consequences by stabilizing them through your confession to the false allegation. The manipulation here is subtle but powerful. You feel responsible for their emotional state. You feel morally obligated to end their suffering. Your confession becomes framed in your own mind as an act of care rather than capitulating to abuse. If saying these words will help them feel better, maybe I should just say them. This internal framing makes emotional extortion particularly damaging because you participate in your own entrapment while believing you're being helpful or even compassionate. Your admission immediately calms the emotional display. The crying stops, the hysteria settles, the threat of consequences recede. This immediate relief functions as a powerful reward. Your brain learns that confession produces relief from emotional distress. This conditioning makes you more likely to confess to false allegations quickly in future interactions to avoid prolonged emotional chaos. As per the others, the confession is remembered and used later, completely separated from the emotional display that coerced it out of you. Your partner quotes your words to others as evidence of your guilt. Friends or family hear about your admission without knowing that it was extracted through sustained emotional manipulation. The context disappears and only your words remain as apparent proof of wrongdoing when your wrongdoing did not exist. Protecting yourself from false confessions requires three things. One is recognizing when it is happening. The second is responding in ways that preserve your integrity. And the third is documenting the context so your truth is not erased. On the first, which is recognition, this comes from three signals. The first signal is a discord between what they want you to admit to and what actually happened. They could be demanding you confess to intentions you did not have, or insisting you admit to actions that didn't happen the way they are describing. Or they're telling you what you were thinking or feeling and it doesn't match your actual internal experience. When there is a clear gap between their versions of events and the facts you as you know them, pay attention to that discord. The second signal is confusion about what's actually true. The pressure has continued on for so long, or the emotional intensity has been so high that you're starting to doubt your own memory. You're questioning whether maybe they are actually right about what you intended, or you're losing track of what actually happened versus what they say happened. When you become too confused to distinguish truth from their narrative, that confusion itself is a warning sign that manipulation is occurring. And the third signal on recognition is the importance they place on getting you to confess. This is when it becomes clear that extracting this specific admission from you matters more to them than anything else. This is when they are not interested in understanding your perspective or collaborative problem solving or even relationship repair. The intensity of their pursuit or the duration of their emotional display reveals that your confession is their goal. When getting you to say specific words becomes more important than mutual understanding, you are facing a forced confession tactic. When you notice these three signals, the discord with facts, the confusion about truth, or the intense focus on extracting your admission, you're likely facing a false confession attempt. The specific mechanics we covered earlier in the type section. So then what matters now is how you respond. So that brings us to two, which is your immediate response. Your immediate response depends on which tactic is being used. The scripts for aggressive coercion are different from the scripts to emotional manipulation. If it's aggressive coercion and you need to create distance, then you might say something like, I am not discussing this now. I'm going to the bedroom or the study. Say this once and then move. Don't explain and do not justify. If they follow you or they try to block you, state simply, you are following me, and then I am going to the kitchen or a different room. State what's happening factually. This creates a clear record in your mind of their behavior. If you find that you need to hold the line around a confession, then you might say something like, I'm not going to say what you're asking me to say. Repeat this exact line if they continue demanding. Don't add reasons, don't defend yourself. The line itself is the boundary. If threats to escalate occur, then name those threats clearly. Say, you're threatening me with, and whatever it is they're threatening you with. I'm not changing my answer. Again, state what's happening factually and repeat your position. If it is emotional manipulation, like distress displays and crying or hysteria, and you need to create some distance, then say something like, I can see that you are upset. I'm going to give you space. This acknowledges their emotional state without taking responsibility for fixing it, then provides physical distance. If they intensify their display or they follow you, say something like, I need to step away while you are upset. I will be in the kitchen or the study. You're framing the distance as necessary for their emotional state, not as rejection. If you need to hold the line around a confession, then you might say something like, I'm not going to agree to something I don't believe is true. I want to understand what you are feeling, but I can't say what you're asking me to say. This separates acknowledging their distress from accepting false guilt. If they attach consequences to refusal of you saying the words they want you to say, then you might say something like, I hear what you're saying. My answer isn't changing. Don't argue with the threat. Don't try to negotiate. Just simply state your position and then hold it. Next thing you need to do is document. Documentation serves two distinct purposes. The first purpose is when you've held the line and no forced confession has occurred. You're documenting your abuser's attempt to extract a forced confession from you over a false allegation or a false narrative that they are trying to establish. Here, you need to write down at the date and the time of what occurred, what they demanded that you say, any specific tactics they used, how you responded, and anything that happened that you think might be worth noting. Note any threats that were made or consequences that were attached to your refusal to agree to the false narrative. This record establishes a pattern of attempts to extract false confessions. If they later claim that you admitted to something, then your notes will show that they have been trying to get that admission and you have been refusing to lie. The second purpose is when a forced confession has occurred. Here, you're creating a record that can introduce the truth about the confession's validity. Write down immediately the date, the time, the location, exactly what they demanded, exactly what you said, and this specific phrase: I agreed to this to end the fight. Document your state, your emotional level, how long the pressure had continued, whether you'd been allowed to sleep, what threats or displays preceded your statement. Note which tactics were used and be specific about the conditions of extraction. This record won't erase the confession, but it creates documented evidence of coercive circumstances that can be presented to therapists or lawyers later. When your abuser later quotes your confessions as proof, you have a record showing it was extracted under duress. Tell one trusted person what happened in either scenario and ask them to write their own dated note of what you told them. This creates corroboration that your account existed immediately after the incident, not months later when legal or custody issues emerged. If you've already given a coerced confession to a falsehood, you can still recover your truth. The damage isn't permanent if you act quickly to document what actually happened. Use this self statement to counter the shame. Say to yourself, this was a survival response under pressure. Saying what they demanded stopped immediate harm. That response does not define me or my character. This is not about denying responsibility for things you actually did. This is about refusing to accept false guilt for intentions you didn't have or actions that didn't happen the way they claimed. Seek trauma informed therapy or a coach like myself that specifically understands coercive control and moral injury. Bring your notes to sessions. These notes help therapists see the pattern of how your words have been systemically captured and weaponized. Therapy provides space to rebuild trust in your own voice and develop the capacity to distinguish between genuine accountability and coerced false confessions. You have the right to take responsibility for things you actually did and intentions you actually had. You also have the right to refuse responsibility for false narratives about your character and manufactured interpretations of your motives. Your genuine accountability, when you take responsibility for actual impacts you caused, carries weight because it comes from reflection and choice. Protecting yourself from false confessions protects the integrity of real accountability. You can be compassionate towards others while maintaining your own truth. You can take responsibility for real impacts without accepting blame for manufactured guilt. This is Stand Again, lived experience platform for male survivors of family violence. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Your voice might just help another man find his. If you're looking for one on one support, you can book coaching with a member of the Stand Again team. Simply visit standagain.com.au, where you will also find grounded information on surviving and recovering from family violence as a man. As always, remember that no matter how many times you've been knocked down, you can stand again.